Hello, and welcome to another Half Pint session. Today we have a slightly different book to talk about, and it's one that my son has been reading for this past week or so. It's Painting Wonder by Katie Wray Schon. Katie, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Hello.
You're well caffeinated up. I've got a pot of tea here brewing. It's going to take a little longer, and this will see me through until it's ready. While I wet my whistle, would you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me on. I'm happy to be here. I am this is my first traditionally published picture book, so it's very exciting. I've always loved arts and I did go to art school, but I studied product design
Okay.
instead of illustration, of course. Um, and I worked for 10 years as an interaction designer, and then I had one kid and I went part-time and I had two kids and I took a little more time off. And then I decided to give it a break. And while at home reading lots and lots of picture books with my little ones, I started having some ideas for my own books and began the journey to becoming a picture book author and illustrator. And about 8 years later, I had my first picture book published. And it is the story of Pauline Baynes, who, as most of you probably know, was the illustrator for the Narnia series, as well as illustrating for Tolkien. And I decided to launch into that particular story, sort of against my own promise to myself that I would never try to write and illustrate a picture book biography of an artist or an illustrator.
Wah, wah.
Yeah. Um, But I came across Pauline's story and I started reading and learning about her, and it was just such a wonderful story. And I have a deep love for the Narnia series. And so once I started reading about her and realized how few other people knew about her,
Hmm.
um, I couldn't not try to tell this story. And so I did, and I'm just so happy that it found a home and now it's out in the world.
So let's rewind a little bit. What was your history with the Inklings in general up until this point?
Sure. So I grew up reading the Narnia books and loved them. And then it's funny, it was almost in college I revisited them. I did a study abroad program in Italy
Ooh,
for a year.
that sounds horrible.
Yeah,
Horrible.
so hard, so hard. It was amazing, but I really didn't have much Italian prior to going. We had a very little bit this particular program that I was in, and so I was trying to learn it. And so I went to the bookstore in Italy, and I found a copy of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in Italian. And because I knew the story so well, I could, I could try to read the book and not get stuck on every little word because I knew it was happening. And I feel like at that point I'd probably taken a little break from reading them over and over again. But then I got back into it and now I read them over and over again just about every year because I love C.S. Lewis. I love Till We Have Faces. It has always been one of my favorite books, the Narnia books, the sci-fi trilogy. I'm always giving to random people and
Quite right too. Doing the Lord's work.
yeah. And so C.S. Lewis was my entry point, and then, I also loved The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, although it's a much bigger time commitment to reread those, and so it doesn't happen quite as often.
Yeah, it's like how much do I want
And
to read
then
about trees today?
exactly. I actually though I re-listened to them, which is many hours of
Uh-huh.
audiobook, while I was drawing the pictures here for Painting Wonder. So
That's the way to do it. My
yes.
first time I started reading The Lord of the Rings, and I stuttered and stopped about halfway through the second the second the Two Towers. And when I actually went through it the first time, I did it on audiobook. And actually, we were listening to the recent adaptation by the guy that did the voice of Gollum,
Mm,
when I drove Marie from San Diego to La Crosse, Wisconsin, when she was 9 months
okay.
pregnant when we moved here. So that
Whew.
That was the soundtrack of our journey, which I thought was very
Ah,
appropriate.
I was gonna say, what a journey. Perfect thing to have.
And I didn't have to steal from a dragon at the end of it, so that was much
Yeah,
better.
there you go.
But
Good.
the idea of picking up the Chronicles of Narnia in another language, that was actually fulfilling some of Lewis's advice when people wrote to him. He had suggested to them to do just that for exactly the same
Huh,
reason.
really?
Yep.
Oh, I didn't know that.
You know the
Huh.
story, and my wife in the first couple of years that we were married, she was doing French on Duolingo, etc. And
Mhm.
for Christmas, I managed to track down a French version of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe for exactly the same reason.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I love that. And now, of course, and it worked, and it really, really helped me. Now, this was a long time ago, and it's all confused in my head. I've studied some Spanish, and I reach for a word now, and I honestly don't know what language it's in. But
Mm-hmm. I did the same thing when I was cramming Spanish. I did a long trip to Spain and then a short trip to Italy. So I
Mm.
crammed the Spanish and I started cramming the Italian. And when I was practicing counting up to 10, it sort of went through like three languages on the way through.
Exactly.
And it's like, yeah, it's all basically
Exactly.
the same.
Uh-huh.
Still pretty, just like it's like a dialect of Latin. Uh,
Yeah.
but that was the Inklings. How did you get onto
Yes.
Pauline Baynes? Because this is really interesting. Because I definitely grew up with her books. I was read Narnia from probably the crib, and so her images were always very clearly stamped into my brain. And when I was a little older, and I got the Chronicles of Narnia on cassette tape because I'm that old, and they were playing, I would still sort of see those images in my head as I was going through. It's kind of funny. It is just basically accepted as canon that her books
Yes.
are Narnia,
Yes.
even if some of us do have a few problems with some of her pictures, like Aslan walking on his hind legs with his hands behind his back. That one's still a little weird and freaks me out. But how did you move into exploring her?
Sure. So, like all great creative stories, it was through complete failure. So, I was building my illustration portfolio and decided to add some middle grade chapter book illustrations. And because those are my favorite books, of course, that's what I would work on. And I'm trying to do sketches and build out these images, and I just could not stop mentally referring back to her images. And it almost, I was frustrated, like, whose pictures are these, and why can't I get them out of my head? Because in a way, unless you really start thinking about it, you do just accept them.
Yeah.
And they almost feel simple or
Mm-hmm.
inevitable, like, of course that's what it looks like. She didn't do anything special. She just drew what it looked like. But and then you realize what a feat that is, and how amazing it is. So that was actually it. I was, who did this? Who did this to me? Um, and that's what started me reading about her. And I, before reading about her, had no idea that she had illustrated for Tolkien and that she had a relationship with them. Um, and illustrated many, many other things too. I mean, she was very, very accomplished, had a very long career. But that was my way in. That was what finally prompted me to figure out where these pictures had come from.
Yeah, and I knew very little about her life. I think I could have maybe told you three or four facts, maybe. But then I heard you interviewed on Chris Pipkin's podcast, the Inklings Variety Hour, and you filled out much more of her biography. And you learn about her life through the course of the picture part of your book, and you have a couple of pages at the end that fill out a few more of the details. But for people that don't know anything about Pauline Baynes, just give us a rough sketch, so to speak, of her life.
Sure. Yeah, so she was born in England in the 1920s, but her family very shortly thereafter, I don't know exactly when. This is something that I'll just acknowledge straight up. There are no biographies, full book-long biographies of her out there. My research process was a lot of scrambling for details, trying to reach out to people that did know her. She passed away in 2008.
Mm.
And so there are definitely some holes here, but so they moved to India. Her father was a civil servant, and they switched between two different locations. They were in the city of Agra in the wintertime, and then in the summers they would go to a town called Missouri, which just looks absolutely beautiful, sort of up in the hills, and there's waterfalls. Um, And those were her first memories. They were there until she was about 5. And there's these stories of, she had an Aya, sort of a nursemaid that was dedicated to her, and she had a pet monkey who had been trained to have tea parties. And
Alexander really liked that bit. I think your book
yeah,
has
it's
actually
a
caused me a real problem. His birthday's in September. I think he's expecting a monkey that can have tea with him.
sorry. Make sure it's well trained when you get one. Um, so then her mother, so whether it was illness or other frustrations with the expat lifestyle, her mother decided it was time to go back to England. So she brought Pauline and Pauline's sister, who was older than Pauline, and they left the father behind and left everything else behind. And supposedly her mother said, you can do whatever you want, but we're going. So there may have been a little estrangement there for a while. So the women all went back to England, and Pauline was put into a boarding school, a religious boarding school. And it was not a happy time for her. Here's this 5-year-old who's been running around in the beautiful hills of India with her pet monkey, and now she's in a boarding school, probably doesn't see her mother very much, definitely doesn't see her father. She did still have her sister, which was helpful, but she was pretty miserable. She got made fun of because of the way she spoke and her clothes,
And at this
and it
point,
really,
I couldn't
yeah,
help but see all of the parallels with Lewis's life. His
yes,
mother actually died, but he was also
right.
sent to another country for boarding
Hmm.
school, which he hated, and he also had his
Hmm.
sibling with him. It's quite amazing the very consistent pattern. And if you look at Tolkien's life, there when they were in Africa, and then his mother took the boys back, and his dad stayed back. It's just quite incredible how the patterns of their lives have so many common features.
It is. It is. It's an interesting. I mean, you could look at the population of the time and how many children did that happen to, or the artists and writers of the time and how many, you know. And then I also, when I first was reading her story, couldn't help thinking about The Little Princess,
Yes, me too.
by Frances Hodgson Burnett. But yeah, so she does talk about how she found storybooks and learned to read, and um, that was her escape, and that was her happiness for a while. And particularly Rudyard Kipling, who I guess also had a similar childhood story,
Hmm.
um, and um, and she just loved it. And so she from there she followed her older sister to an art school from that school. And there's some quote where she mentioned, she went to art school because it was easy for her. um, and then again to another art school. And so she kind of was on track with her sister, who was a painter. And I have not found, I would love to find, but I have not found any of Pauline's work from her art school days,
Mm.
which I believe was more traditional painting, portraiture. There is one picture that you can find that I think was done by her sister. That's sort of a portrait of a woman, a traditional style. Um, but Pauline never finished art school, never graduated, because World War II started, and again, she and her sister signed up for the Women's Voluntary Corps
Mm.
in England to help with the war effort. And also a really fun story from there. She first was in the, I believe it was the Royal Camouflage Training Center. I might have some of those words mixed up. Um, but it sounded like a real quirky group of artists and characters who they got together to try to develop new camouflage methods, or to train, they'd take somebody from the military and sort of train them in camouflage methods and then send them back out to be the specialist in that. So she was there for a while and then moved to the Admiralty, where she was doing these very detailed maps or hydrographic charts.
Do any of
Yeah.
those maps still survive? And do they bear more than a passing resemblance to certain maps of Narnia and Middle Earth?
I cannot imagine they had their names on them. So
Mm.
perhaps. And I looked around to try to find some examples of what they would have looked like, and that's what I used sort of for the reference in the book. I don't know if there were, she was there for a few years, I believe, and she mentioned how it certainly that kind of detailed pen and ink that had to be very exact, very controlled, contributed to her line work and her abilities later on. And I love the connection between her drawing those maps and then later having these iconic maps for Narnia.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't have her versions, but I do have Narnia and Middle Earth up on mine.
oh, I love those are nice. Those are nice ones. We'll forgive you for them not being Pauline Baynes versions.
Hers are harder to buy. It's actually one of the things
Yes.
I do think somebody is missing a trick. Whoever has the rights to her pictures.
Yes, I agree.
I
Well,
would fill this house with prints if I could have access
right?
to them.
Some of them, the Narnia ones are owned by the Narnia estate.
Hmm.
Um, and then there is a wonderful, and this is a fun, if you're ever in Western Massachusetts,
Okay.
Williams College.
Yes, I've heard about these guys.
Yes, they have a special collections library, and that is where she left all of her sketches and drawings and materials. And so they have, I don't know how many boxes, I should find out this number. They have many, many boxes of her artwork, excluding the Narnia stuff. And I'm actually not sure about some of the Tolkien materials. I What I remember is that some of the letters and things that she had, she actually gave to Tolkien's family because she had a friendship with Tolkien and his wife. She and her husband were close with them.
Mm,
C.S. Lewis, not as much. And so there were letters, but I believe she gave them to Tolkien's family. So I think that's who has them.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Okay, so she has to put her career on pause because of the war.
yes.
Again, much like
Mhm.
Lewis, he was at Oxford and then had to go and fight. After the war ends, how does she proceed?
So it sounds like she was bouncing a little bit all over the place then. She had done a little bit of picture book work during the war. There was a young man whose family was in publishing who was in the camouflage group with her, who commissioned several artists from that group and I think from other sort of war volunteers to do picture books. They're they're kind of quirky. This is just early days, different days in children's publishing. It's hard to find these examples, but I think the first book she ever illustrated was one called Question Mark uh, by this Powell Perry thing, and it's oddball. I've seen some of the artwork, and it's very high contrast.
Hmm.
So and then she actually wrote and illustrated, I believe, with the same group, her own picture book called Victoria and the Golden Bird. Again, it's kind of quirky, feels like a different era, and so she had been dabbling in picture books, and then she also, after the war, was doing commercial illustration for magazines and advertisements, big Christmas scenes and things like that. They're really, really beautiful, some religious scenes. So she was doing that. She was also teaching at one of her former art schools. And then there's also her parents were both back in England and she was living with them and helping to take care of them. I don't know exactly what that meant then, how their health was, but she was part of that. And so this is this time period where she had all these different things that she was doing, trying to make a living. And then at night, once, the day was done, she'd work on her portfolio and do the things that she really loved, which was these sort of fantastical medieval illustrations. And it was years of that, of these different things, sort of the day jobs and stuff when Tolkien saw her portfolio when they were looking for somebody for Farmer Giles of Ham,
Hmm.
and that set it off.
And it went from then from Tolkien to Lewis. And then I have heard varieties of stories as to how all of this happened. It doesn't
Yes.
seem to be a single one.
No, no, it does not. Both the how Tolkien saw her portfolio for the first time is sort of a fun story with a little bit of exactly what happened. Where we do know that the publisher had found a different illustrator for Farmer Giles of Ham, and Tolkien saw the early work and really didn't like it, and they fired the poor guy. Um, and and then there's the sort of legendary version of it is, Tolkien happens to walk up to his publisher's desk, and Pauline's portfolio happens to be there because she had sent it just randomly to this publisher, and it was all a happy chance. Um, there's some documentation, I guess, that indicates that maybe the publisher had solicited portfolios, and so it wasn't entirely by chance. But either way,
Mm.
um,
The way I'd
the
always
fact that
harmonize
they
the way I'd always harmonize that was I assumed it was something the equivalent of that they had solicited proposals, got a load of them in,
Mhm,
they picked their favorite, and then Tolkien said, "No, no,
right.
no, I want that one over there."
Could be, yeah. And he saw she had done, just for fun, she had done some medieval little almost cartoons. And there's maybe even another little story that she had sent one in a letter to someone who encouraged her to build that out. So there's some trail there, but and he just loved them and decided they were perfect, and so she did that book for him. And then similarly, there's this slightly unclear story of how she was connected with C.S. Lewis, and the two versions that I've heard are that, either Tolkien told C.S. Lewis, you should use this illustrator, or that, and this always feels like an oddly specific story, that C.S. Lewis walked into a bookstore and asked the bookseller for illustrator recommendations, and she recommended Pauline.
Hmm. Yeah, it's one of those weird things in history that things that you think would be very clear and that would be like,
Hmm.
no, even that isn't. Now you mentioned there the medieval illustrations, and that's something that really jumped out at me as I was going through your book. You have a very similar sort of style throughout, that it would look like an illuminated text from the Middle Ages.
Yes, and I try to pull from, and it's a little bit just how I draw naturally and how I doodle, especially. Um, but also, I spent a lot of time looking at as much of her work as I could, and why I had never wanted to do a picture book biography of another artist or illustrator is because it's very hard to try to, what the goal is, to get people to learn about her life and then go find her work,
Hmm.
and look at her work. And her work is not in the book, which is kind of an Amazon review. um my one star review is a gentleman who was very disappointed because he was really hoping to have all of Pauline's work all in one book, and it's not in there. so, um, so my goal is to encourage people to go out and find her work in other places, but also trying to have an illustrative style that
Has
is
echoes.
inspired by her
Hmm.
work, that echoes the work, that somehow calls back to it. And so it was a lot of fun, actually, being able to try to look at her work and see how that inspired me. In the end, um, it was a pleasant, it was an exciting process because it made me look deeper at her work than I think I would have otherwise. So.
And it certainly it tuned my observation because I discovered your book just before Easter, and at Easter I read my son The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe for the first time. So on
Oh.
Easter Sunday, it wasn't just Jesus who rose from the dead.
Mhm.
And so I was also paying attention to the pictures as we were going through, since I didn't have your book at that point, but it was in the mail. And I was paying much more attention to it as we went through. And then as I was reading your book to Alexander over the last couple of weeks, his favorites are the dragons. He really loves your dragons,
Mm.
particularly like they got little tummies, and he thinks that's really funny. But also because when we got to the battle in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, I pointed out to him something that I discovered and I really liked, which is if you look carefully, there is a squirrel fighting a dragon. So the dragon's holding the squirrel, and the squirrel's like going for it. And so
Oh.
Alexander wondered if that was the same dragon. I said, I'm sure it is.
Oh. I love that. That's great. That's great. Yeah, and that's what I hope, is that thinking about her makes people really focus. And that the neat thing too, and it's fun to look around is you can find she did the original drawings, and at the time the original published versions, her work was on the cover as well. Maybe you can picture there was sort of a
Hmm.
solid color and then this circle. Um, and then years later, they commissioned her to watercolor the original illustrations and add some. And so some of the later versions that you find of the book that have color illustrations, she did do those.
Mm.
And actually at Williams College in their special collections library, one of the fun things to see was just photocopies, regular photocopies of her original drawings that she had then been doing color studies on
Mm.
with little notes about, like too dark here or this looks flat. And so those are fun to look at too. And then also being at the Special Collections Library and seeing some of her original artwork, not for Narnia, but for some other books that she's done, her level of detail is incredible. And sometimes that gets lost in especially some older printings
They're a
of
bit
the drawings.
smudgy.
And so yeah,
Yeah.
they're a bit smudgy. It's the paper, it's the print quality. So it's a fun task to try to get your hands on some of I think it was in the 90s that they had her do the color. And so not only are those fun to see in color, and it's still her work, but it's fun to see a higher quality printing of her drawings because they're really detailed and fabulous.
It was actually, I would say, the best thing about the Voyage of the Dawn Treader movie, which itself was a bit of a train crash.
Mhm.
But in the closing credits, they had Pauline's drawings and
Yes.
animated out. That was easily my favorite part of the entire movie.
Yes, it's funny. I just watched that with my children because we're finally now everybody has read them. My youngest is 7, and she just finished the series, and so we were holding off on watching the movies. And I had forgotten how far off track the Voyage of the Dawn Treader goes from.
We did a double episode with some other podcasters from the Lamppost Listener, and
Oh yeah,
it was a hate fest. We tried hard to
yeah.
find things we liked, but have you
It's
guys seen any of the earlier adaptations? Because this season we recorded an episode where we looked at the live action black and white version in the '60s. There's only a couple of episodes
no.
left. Yeah, it's.
Ooh.
I'll send you links afterwards. And
Yes, please do.
there was also a cartoon from the 1970s that is pretty good. You can tell that they had to rush production a little bit. If you occasionally pause the picture, it really does look like that there's just a sketch that, well, it's almost like we'll come back and tidy this up later.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. That's funny. I remember the cartoon a little bit from my childhood. I especially remember the cartoon of The Hobbit,
Yes. Oh,
which was
I
terrifying,
was going to
but
say traumatizing. They
yes,
showed that
yes.
to us
Oh,
in
the
school as
finger.
well.
Oh, yes. Mhm.
I was very confused and deeply concerned about it because I'd read the book before that, and then I
Mhm.
saw
Mhm.
this. I was like, "What is this?" Something about the technique of rotoscoping sometimes yields a very sort of uncanny.
Yes.
It's kind of yes, it's the uncanny valley. There's something kind of creepy about the way they move in terms of this is so close, but just a little off. Mm.
Yep. Yep.
Well,
Well, we'll see how the next series goes, but we.
well, let's talk about then life after Narnia because
Yes.
I think it was after Narnia she did the illustration for the Nicene Creed, which my co-host Andrew has a copy of.
Okay.
What was that the timing, and also what were some of the other things that she worked on?
I think that was quite a bit later,
Hmm.
and honestly, I can't give you. I also have a copy of it, but not here with me, so I don't know the date on that book. But she illustrated. I mean, she continued illustrating until she passed away, and I think her career, the Narnia books were always the most famous thing. The map she did for Tolkien, the Middle Earth map, I think became a pretty big thing as well, and then she did the covers for the not not the first publication, but I think when they put the 3 books together um, for the first time in a box set, she did the covers there. Um, and she won the Kate Greenaway medal, which is like For the Americans, it's like the Caldecott, but the British version, and it's now called the, what is it called now? They've just changed the name, the Carnegie Medal, I
Okay.
think.
Hmm.
Um, so that's a very big deal, and she won that for a really neat book. It's fun to see if you want to get your hands on it. It's a dictionary of chivalry.
Oh, I
Um,
like that.
and yeah, yeah, and it's one of these, and I love these kinds of books that are dictionaries or collections of words or grammar, but the author's tone comes through, it's a little bit storybook, a
It's
little
not
bit
so
reference.
dry. Hmm.
Yeah, it's not so dry. I mean, and she just illustrated the margins on every single page. It's incredible amount of work, really neat. And so she did that, and then she has quite a few books of religious text that she illustrated, and I don't know the history. It would be fun to find out the history of who whose idea they were. Did this come from her that she wanted to do that? That wouldn't surprise me. Or was it a request by the publisher? But she has the Nicene Creed, the beginning of Genesis. What is it? The Song of the Three Holy Children,
Hmm.
which is a from the book of Daniel. There's a psalm that she's done. And so they're really beautiful, beautiful books. They're picture books. And as an illustrator, I spent a lot of time looking at them. One, because they're very rich with sort of her style and her detail and her figures and animals, and so they were a wonderful resource for, okay, if I'm adding a tree, how did she draw trees? What's the inspiration there? Um, but also, the idea of illustrating the Nicene Creed is mind-bending. Um, how do you bring
How
to
do you draw
life?
homoousios?
Right, and so she did it, and this is the kind of stuff she could do, and it's lovely. It's lovely, and it's very interesting from a just what does the language mean, and how do you visualize it, and the moments that are very abstract and things that are very concrete that she brings out of it. So those books are a lot of fun to look at, and you feel like you're talking with Pauline.
Hmm.
And there's not a lot of she didn't write a ton, there's not diaries and these things that you can read. I think she had some date books and things like that, but and so you really, if you want to get to know her, it's probably going to be through her pictures and what she chose to illustrate. Um and my sense of her is that she was she was fun. She had a lively sense of curiosity and love for art and understanding for art, and did a lot of materials for children, and clearly loved this sort of visual language. And I think she was also very humble. She was not out there seeking accolades and trying to get people to pay attention to her. I think she loved to do her work, and that was that.
Hmm. So that was her life after Narnia. What's going to be your life after Baynes? Do you have anything lined up?
um Good question. I have a book that is very different. That's a it's a little rhyming book about guardian angels, that is hopefully going to be out in January, uh, but we'll see. And then I have some other books that I'm working on. I wonderfully through this whole process, I have an agent now, and that makes it more fun to I get to create the things and then just kind of hand them off, and she can help me find a home for them, which is nice. And so we've got a couple of other things in the works that she's going to be submitting, and um, I again the process of doing this picture book biography, I really enjoyed, and so I can't help thinking about more people that, oh, wouldn't it be fun to dig into this person and that person, and the Inklings, many of the, well, at least C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, who I know best among the Inklings, are pretty well covered on that front.
Well, I actually have a
So,
suggestion. I would like to see you do
oh
G.K.
yeah.
Chesterton because he was an
All
influence
right,
on both
I
of them.
just here on the shelves behind me. So this is a fresh, the reason why there's so much empty space is because these are brand new shelves, which is exciting. And we just went to a library book sale to start filling things in here, and I pulled a biography of G.K. Chesterton and was thinking to myself, gosh, I would love that. love to do that. So I got to read my biography and we'll see what it says.
I think that would be really fun. My wife and I have seen the cache of all of his books. They were at
Mm.
the Oxford Oratory. They're now in London, but we got to
Mm.
look through his books and we got to see his doodles. And oh my
Oh,
goodness, this guy never just read. He was
oh,
just like doodling along the sides. Lots of like kind of little ornate, the sort of like medieval ornamentation, but also swords. This guy loved to draw swords in the margins of books. So
oh, that's great.
I think he'd be really fun.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'll let you know how it goes. If I come up with a draft, I'll make you read it and give me some.
Absolutely.
It's nice. It's nice now that I could say, okay, if I have somebody else's biography to read, the research process can be
A little simpler,
a
and
little more
his life
streamlined.
is also better documented as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah. I know, Pauline, I keep, and I'm going to keep saying this on all the podcasts. I hope there's somebody out there looking for like a graduate thesis or
Hmm.
something like that who can really, really dig into this because I think it would be fascinating. I think there's so many connections. I mean, she had a friendship with A. A. Milne,
Yeah,
and there's letters between them, and there's a lot of interesting little pockets and the history and the timeline. So someone get on that, all right?
I've consistently found that with those other people who are in the Inklings or Inklings adjacent, none of them had boring lives. I just don't think
Yeah,
it's possible to be connected with that group in any way and live at that time of history and not at least have an interesting
right.
life.
Right. Oh, that's the other name I would consider. I about Dorothy Sayers. Are there
Oh
biographies of
yes.
her?
Oh my goodness. Yes. You could have the whole
That would be
detective motif throughout. That'd be fun.
oh, it'd be so much fun.
uh,
All right,
if
I've got my reading list now.
if you do that, I have scholars I will connect you to. They will tell you everything that you need to
Oh,
do.
oh, okay. All right. Good to
Well,
know. Good to know.
where can people go to find out more about you and pick up a copy of Painting Wonder?
Yeah, so you can go to my website is katierayshon.com. That's Katie, KatieWray, which was my maiden name, and then Schon, Schon, is my married name. And there's a little bit about me on there. There's I actually have a few little coloring pages and things to go with the book that you can print for free from the website if you're interested. And then really you can find the book just about anywhere. You can find it online. You can hopefully find it in your local bookstore. I've seen it in some Barnes and Nobles, and I always like supporting the local bookstores if you can. So if you stop in and see if they have it, that'd be wonderful.
Absolutely. Well, Katie, thank you so much for coming on the show. And everyone else, please join us again next time. We'll continue going further up and further in. Cheers.